Open your Bibles, please, to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. We're doing a study of the book of Ecclesiastes. It's a great work on philosophy. It's a book about ethics, trying to determine what is that good for the sons of men, which they should do under heaven all the days of their life. Composed by Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel. It is important to remember that as Solomon investigates this philosophical question, that he does so within the framework, as he defines it, under the sun. Now, there was one point last Sunday as I re-listened to some of the sermon where I said beyond the sun when I meant under the sun. I apologize for that. Sometimes my prepositions get into some kind of dyslexic mode inside my brain. But at any rate, he is not looking at life beyond the sun, like that Spanish song said, allá del sol, beyond the sun. He's looking at life under the sun, within the framework of the birth and death of our own lives under the sun. And as he analyzes that, he comes up with the conclusion that it's vanity of vanities, all is vanity. It's just a great big zero. Making a joke with me last week, I asked Justin if he got anything out of the sermon. He said, I got nothing. I walked away with nothing. Just a bunch of zeros, which means he got the point. Because that's what it was about. That apart from beyond the sun, just under the sun, that's what life in this world amounts to, if you think of it only within that narrow context. And so anyway, let's pick up where we left off. He had just talked about the constant circuits of the sun, the wind, and the water that he found in nature. And he found that the sun, wind, and water were constantly moving, yet always ending up right where they began. Constantly in motion, but ending up where they began. And if you think about it, and we gave you a series of verses, one of which came from Ecclesiastes chapter 5, that's true of us. In our life, we're always in motion, but we end up exactly where we began. We came from the dust, we go back to the dust. We came naked into this world, we leave naked. We don't bring anything in, and we don't take anything out, no matter how much we accumulated or accomplished in the beginning, from the beginning to the end. We end up where we were, just like the circuits of nature. So it leaves one to ask the question, what is it all for? And then we left off last Sunday where he makes this statement in verse 8. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. That is, he cannot utter the fullness of all that's in labor. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear hearing. And I thought about that statement, that a man cannot utter the fullness of labor. You take this one single sermon that I am preaching. I've been doing this for 50 years. I've been preaching for 50 years. As of this coming April, I will have been pastoring 50 years. God in heaven only knows all the experiences and all the labor that has gone into me arriving at the place where I am today in my spiritual maturity, growth, and knowledge that is now expressed in this sermon. I cannot utter to you the fullness of labor that is behind this one piece of labor. Think about that. And that's true of any piece of labor that any one of you engages in. Your mind, you cannot utter the fullness of it. And then he goes on and makes the statement that the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear full of hearing. You see, it's like the sea. The sea is not full, even though all the rivers run into the sea. Just as all the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. All the things that have passed into your eyes over these years, and still your eyes are not satisfied. They're still not full. Still there's more to see. Still you want to see. And the same with the hearing of the ear. All the stuff that's poured into your ears, and yet the ear is not filled with hearing. There's always more to hear and more to see. Now, he goes on and says in verses 9 through 11, the thing that hath been is that which shall be. And that which is done, even what we saw done this week, is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time which was before us. There is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of the things that are to come with those things that shall come after. Like the constant circuits of nature that are ever changing, ever moving, and yet remain the same, so it is that which hath been, the thing that hath been is that which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. By the time Solomon arrived on the scene, mankind had already tried everything that could be tried, every form of government, every scheme had already been tried to make the world a better place. And it wasn't. And in this book, Solomon will give you examples of things that are very wrong with the world as he found it in his day. Nothing new under the sun. I'm not going to read this for you. I've read it in the past. I'll leave it on your own clock to read it. But you can go to Romans chapter 1, verses 21 through 32. And there, Paul will give you a vivid description of the case of the world as it had in past history all the way up to his day. Going all the way in the past, when men did not like to retain God in their knowledge, when they invented other gods rather than worship the invisible God that creation proclaims is there, the one supreme being of eternal power and Godhead. Rather than retain that in their knowledge, they made gods after their own images and imaginations. They became vain in their imaginations. And then all of the moral corruption that flowed out of the corruption of religion. And he describes it in detail. The sex perversion. He starts out with that and shows how that degenerate thing in cultures flowing out of the fact that men did not regard the true God. But then, when you get to 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5, Paul describes the way things will be in the last days. In the last days, perilous times shall come. And he proceeds to describe what those times will be like. And if you look in verses 1 through 5 of 2 Timothy 3, it exactly matches what Paul says in Romans 1 that says, that this tells us this world is never going to become a better place. It's not going to happen. I don't care what politicians promise, what programs they implement, how messianic they sound. It's going to end up just like Paul described it in Romans 1. Nothing improved. It's all been tried. We are a fallen, sinful humanity, and that stays the same. No matter at what stage we are in all of our technological advances, the basic experiences of life remain the same. You have work, play, grief, joy, family, friendship, romance, betrayal, gain, loss, war, health, sickness, birth, death, etc. This has been the experience of man since the fall, and it will continue to the end. There is no new thing under the sun. Every scheme to make it better had already been tried by the time Solomon wrote these words. And if there was anybody that had the power, political power, to make it all better, it would have been Solomon, for reasons that I will explain as I go further. And so, no matter where we are, life pretty well remains the same for us. Now, we have the antediluvian civilization before the flood. And that civilization lies buried, forgotten with the flood. But I have a belief that when Solomon says there's no new thing under the sun, I do not believe that all of our technological advances are the first time for this in history. If you go back to just the brief description that the Bible gives us of the world before the flood, you will find a universal language. There was no language barrier for research scientists to have to overcome to compare their findings. The world was of one language. You will also find that people were living hundreds of years. I think it is very logical to conclude that their intelligence quotient was probably superior to ours. The greatest Adam was created good, very good, the perfection of humanity. And since the fall, humanity has just degenerated down, 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 down. So I think it's a pretty safe assumption that the intelligence quotient of those prior to the flood was probably greater than ours is now, to say nothing of the fact that they had hundreds of years of life to accumulate knowledge and experience, to do research, and to develop. All you've got to do is look at Genesis chapter 4, the descendants of Cain, and you will see the very beginnings of the development of civilization. You will see the very beginning of a financial center, an entertainment center, an educational center, a technological center. Who knows what advances of technology there were, but I suspect that we don't have anything on them. But where's the evidence of it? Bear in mind, the flood was not just a gentle rainfall. This was turbulent storm. This was earthquakes, volcanic action, upheavals of the earth crust. Who knows what remnants lie buried deep, deep within the crust of this earth that we have not been able to unearth, because it was God's intent to wipe it out. And wipe it out He did. Literally flushed it into the sewer. Who knows what lies deep in the caves of the ocean unexplored by man, or beneath its oceanic surfaces? Who knows? Who knows? It all lies forgotten with the flood. And then many of the achievements of the post-diluvian, that is after the flood, civilizations are buried in ruins, leaving us with only fragments to piece together. I suspect that some of the empires of the past, if we could go visit those civilizations, we would be absolutely shocked at some of the things that they developed. Just a description that I have read of the Wall of Babylon defies understanding. How in the world did they build a wall that tall, that wide, that big? Even to this very day, archaeologists are mystified by how in the world did they build those pyramids with such accuracy. Who knows what accomplishments lie buried in ruins in the past? I've seen an artist's representation of ancient Babylon, what it might have looked like. When I did the series on Daniel 9, I even put that picture in the outline. And if that's any facsimile of what it was like, it was an amazingly developed civilization, all lie buried in ruins of the past. So, that thing which hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And what we do has already been done. So that, he asks this question, is there anything whereof it may be said, this is new? Well, if you look within the framework of just under the sun, if you just look at only what man with his unaided reason can ferret out, you might draw the conclusion, nah, there's nothing new under the sun. But if you look at things from the standpoint of the Bible, then the answer to the question, is there any new thing, is there anything new? The answer is a resounding yes. Shall I give you the verses that prove that? Come to 2 Chronicles chapter 5. 2 Chronicles chapter 5, and look at verse 17. Therefore, if any man be in Christ... See, Solomon's not looking at life from the Christocentric viewpoint. He's not looking at the world from the standpoint of someone in Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:17. What did I say? Chronicles? Oh my God. Corinthians. Why do they have to both begin with a C? Therefore, if any man be in Christ, 2 Corinthians 5:17, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. See, in Christ all things are new. So Solomon Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? Yes. One created in Christ. That's new. And all things with it. Then come over to Colossians chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 10. Colossians 3:10 tells us that we have put on the new man. Look at that. Here's something new, which is renewed in knowledge. Here's something new, after the image of him that created him. Then come over to Psalm 40. Psalm 40. Even in the times of Solomon's father, there were some new things around. But Solomon wasn't factoring that in to his viewpoint of the world when he wrote Ecclesiastes. In Psalm 40, verses 1 through 3, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry. He brought me up also out of an horrible pit, and out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my goings. He hath put a new song in my mouth, and he'll tell you what that song is. Even praise unto our God. Many shall see it, and fear shall trust. Many shall see it, and fear, and shall trust in the Lord. And compare that verse with Revelation chapter 5, and you will see that this new song of praise to God is praise to God for redemption. For a new beginning, redeemed from the life of the old man under sin, condemned under the Old Testament. But now made a new man, redeemed from the old man of sin, and redeemed from the Old Testament of death, of the law and death. And so the song is sung in Revelation 5:9, and they sung a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof, for thou wast slain, and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation. And when we sang of the sacrifice of Christ for us this morning, and how great thou art, a song of praise, in verse 3, we were singing a new song. Is there anything new in the realm of music? Yes. But if you look at the songs of the old man, you hear them all the time, and what are they about? They're about me. They're about others. This particular love of mine, how wonderful she is. Or this particular love of mine, she betrayed me, and now I am prostrate with grief. So much vanity of vanities and vexation of the spirit, because it's all about us. But the new song is about him. Even praise to our God, and particularly for redemption, which is deliverance. Deliverance from an old to a new life, from an old world to a new world, from old things to new things. And then the destiny of the redeemed. When this present sun is passed away, and we are allá del sol, beyond the sun, we will find a new heaven and a new earth where all things are new. Revelation, while you're there, flip over to chapter 21, verses 1 and verse 5. Verses 1 and 5 of Revelation 21. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Now, when does he see this? For the first heaven and the first earth, with the sun under which Solomon was viewing things, were passed away. So now we're beyond the sun, and there was no more sea. Verse 5, and he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. So is there anything whereof it may be said, this is new? For the Christian, there is plenty. You see, Solomon is obviously viewing life and things of life and of this world apart from the gospel of Jesus Christ. He's taking the viewpoint you get from worldly education and worldly reasoning that has no reference to the gospel of Jesus Christ. But the gospel of Christ proclaims a hope that is laid up for us in heaven in Colossians 1:5. For the hope which is laid up for you in heaven, a hope for new things, a new beginning, a new life. And like I say, politicians keep promising this. The New Deal. I skipped this one the other day, Nixon's new federalism, the new covenant, the new world order, the new this, the new that. For the hope which is laid up for you in heaven, whereof you've heard before in the word of the truth of the gospel. Our hope is a hope of a new world, a new life, where nothing is corruptible or undefiled, and nothing fades away, nothing grows old, it ever remains new. Is there anything whereof it may be said this is new? Yes, the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the hope of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So you will find that what I will do in this series on Ecclesiastes, as we dig deep into the despairing conclusion of Solomon as he views life under the sun, we will plug the gospel into it and we'll get a refresher before we go back down into the doldrums with Solomon. Now, then this, coming back to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and let me say this in passing, before I go further. There are those that are quite disturbed over the fact that Mr. Trump's Twitter account has been deleted and he no longer has a voice on Twitter. And of course the concern is that they do not want the truth that Mr. Trump has to utter to be disseminated, and thus they have destroyed his Twitter account. Oh, aren't we upset? Oh, don't the conspiracy theorists have a field day with that? Well, let me tell you one thing. Mr. Trump is not the truth. Jesus Christ is, number one. And even if there is truth that he has to convey and wants to tell, this is not the first time that the effort has been made in history to squelch the voice of truth. Remember, this world crucified the truth to silence him. And did they succeed? No, they did not. Truth is an indestructible force, and it will prevail, and it will find its way. It does not start with Donald Trump. It does not end with Donald Trump. And I suppose if you investigate him far enough and thoroughly enough, you will find untruth coming from his lips as well. In fact, one of the things he says that bothers me greatly, I've done more than any president in history. And I just have to say, really? Really? Isn't that a bit of an inflated claim, don't you think? Look, go read Jeremiah 9. None were valiant for truth on the earth. When we looked in the Bible study last Wednesday night in Isaiah 59 at the decadent, deplorable condition to which society had sunk, what did it say? Truth has fallen in the street. So do not think it's all over because Twitter deleted his account. Don't go there, people. Where's your faith? And besides, if you're so all fired upset with what Twitter and Facebook have done, are you going to continue to patronize them? If you're really upset about it, then put your actions where your convictions are. Now enough on that. But it bears saying, there's nothing new under the sun, people. This is the first time something like this has happened, and it shan't be the last if this world stands. Now, this is something that really gets to us. Verse 11, there is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after. Sadly, but truly, we enter this world only to forget and to be forgotten. Psalm 31:12, I am forgotten as a dead man out of mind. Most dead people end up forgotten. The vast majority, millions upon billions, die, and in a couple of generations, forgotten. I am forgotten as a dead man out of mind. I'm like a broken vessel. I have lost loved ones in my life, people that were dear to me years ago, and now there will be days, whole days, maybe weeks, I never even think of them. They don't even cross my mind. I'm just busy going on with my life. If you think about, and it's true, alas, most of the world's history lies buried in oblivion. Comparatively speaking, only a tiny fraction is recorded, and most pay no mind to that. I mean, think about it. How much does anyone here know about the presidency and accomplishments of Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, John Tyler, Zachary Taylor, Millard Fillmore, Martin Van Buren? You remember? James K. Polk. Remember these guys? Remember what they did? Do you? Really? How many of you didn't even know they were presidents? I had to refresh my memory by looking at the list today. Think about it. How much time have you devoted this week to thinking about the military conquests of Alexander the Great? How much time have you spent remembering and poring over the defeat of the Spanish Armada under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I? I mean, think about it. Think about it. Only a tiny fraction of history is really recorded, and most pay no mind to that. Connie Fonville was giving away a bunch of books here a while ago. She was going to be vacating her condo, and I got this great big volume called Chronicles of World History. And it's treating the major events of world history like newspaper articles. And then on the side, they'll just have maybe a sentence about this event or that event. And then some of them actually merit a few paragraphs of commentary. I lived during the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Let me tell you, that was a big, big event in my life. I remember where I found it out. I was in junior high school. I remember talking about it at my locker of what had gone on in the assassination. And I remember saying to some guy, by now, he is as dead as a doornail. Because that's what we said down south. When you really wanted to drive home that somebody was dead, you said he's as dead as a doornail. I can still remember when Oswald got shot, the man that was accused of assassinating him, and my mother running out into the yard as I was out on the street. Oswald's been shot. And we went in and we glued ourselves to the television to watch this event taking place. I remember all of that. I mean, that was a national, world-shattering event. And I go look, and for many of you in here, it's just a little piece of history. It means very little to you because you didn't live it. And I go and I look in this book on the Chronicles of World History. There's a sentence and a picture. And that's it. That's it. To be forgotten. I mean, how much are we impacted by the assassination of President Garfield? Did you know he was assassinated? Or the assassination of President McKinley? Did you know he was assassinated? We all know about Lincoln. They won't let us forget that. But how about those two? We've had 4. But you see, there it is. Only a tiny fraction recorded, and most pay no mind to that. I remember my mother's first cousin sent me a picture of her grandpa Dave. Would have been my great-grandfather, David Yarborough. She had lived with him. My mother used to talk about Grandpa Dave. I think he had a mustache like you have, Joe. And she used to talk about his thick mustache. But you know, I didn't know him. I look at that picture. It means nothing to me. I mean, if I want to study my family tree, yeah, but I never grieved a day over the loss of him. Never. I didn't know the man. Even though he was my forebear, I come from him. And very soon, the generation of people that lived to know him personally will all be gone. Just bleep into oblivion. Think about your own life. You have forgotten most of your life in the events. You absolutely have. I mean, what was I preaching about on this particular Sunday 2 years ago? Anybody remember? I don't. And I could, John Garlinghouse is looking up, see if he can. If you can, man, you win the prize for memory. I'd have to go back and look in the records. And you know what? I am confident that I put as much of myself and work and prayer and preparation into that as I did this today. And I don't even remember it. I went back through my records because I wanted to find when I brought the first Bible study in Michigan in Jim Ruma's basement on Fairview. Now, that I remember. It was a snowy evening in January. It was January 20th. And the only reason I know that is I looked it up in my records. And I did a Bible study on the book of Philemon. It's the first thing I did in Michigan. And I went to look that up. But I also noticed I was still a pastor down south in the Primitive Baptist, and I saw in the record all these other sermons I had preached and different places I had traveled to and I had preached. And then while I remember the trips and traveling to those places, I don't remember preaching those sermons. I couldn't have told you what I preached. Just think about how much of your own life lies buried in oblivion. You don't even remember it. You don't even remember the events. And you know, that is a sobering thing. Because, you know, we all would like to be remembered, especially by people we love. We all would like to think we've made some kind of mark, some kind of impact. Pat, yes?
I think 2 years ago on this Sunday, you probably would have been preaching about Mike Birmingham.
Maybe, because he did die 2 years ago. And I don't even know what series I was on. I don't even know if I was here. No, I would have been here. I was there on the first weekend, but I couldn't tell you what the sermon was. Nice try, though. Nice try, Kevin. You're coming about as close as anybody's going to get to it. Well, yeah, because we knew Mike, see. We were very involved with Mike in our lives. But outside our circle, who was Mike Birmingham? And outside his family circle, who was Mike Birmingham? Who's Don Dirkseide? And so, yeah, I had a lunch with Jim and Dee. Linda and I had lunch with Jim and Dee here, a number of months ago when you could dine in, and we were over at Olive Garden. And Linda had just turned 70. And Dee asked Linda about what matters to you at this age. And the conversation distilled down to this, that we desperately want our life to count and have made an impact on our grandchildren. I want my grandchildren to remember me and remember me well and remember the contribution I made to their life. I'll do something for them and I'll think, what are they going to think about when they stand over my casket crying? And you better be crying when you stand over my casket. People say, there's a song in here that says, let not a tear be shed on my grave. Not me. I want grief. I want you crying. I want to know, I want to know I made an impact enough you're going to miss me when I'm gone.
They'll have an Irish wake for you.
Yeah, I bet. But the point of it is, we all want to know we made a difference. I know Marydale is mentioned. She likes it when people talk to her about Conrad. She likes to know that he was remembered, that he made a difference. And I remember some people after Conrad retired from the ministry would let him know what he had meant in their lives, and he would tell me about that. And I could see just how happy he was to know that he had had an impact, that all those years of work had made a difference. We really, really want that. And yet the truth of the matter is, couple of generations from us, forgotten. That's a general rule. Forgotten. But turn to Psalm 112. Turn to Psalm 112. But plug in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And look at what you read. In Psalm 112, verses 4 through 6. Unto the upright there ariseth light in the darkness. He is gracious and full of compassion and righteous. A good man showeth favor and lendeth. He will guide his affairs with discretion. Surely he shall not be moved forever. The righteous shall be had in everlasting remembrance. God will not forget us. It hurts to think of ourselves and those we love as forgotten. But our God promises He will not forget us. We will be in everlasting remembrance. Look at Isaiah 49, this beautiful promise. And God willing, at the end of this service, we're going to sing a song that was written, The Lord remembers me. The Lord remembers me. I need not fear if He is near and still remembers me. In Isaiah 49:14, but Zion said, The Lord hath forsaken me, and my Lord hath forgotten me. Can a woman forget her sucking child, that she should not have compassion on the son of her womb? Yea, they may forget, and sometimes they do. I've told the story before of us going up to see the Velites with Phil and Linda Yunker and their kids one Sunday afternoon, and they drove away to go back with to Grand Rapids and had left one of their kids behind. And it wasn't until they got down the road they realized one was missing. They came back. Oh, we had a lot of fun with that. See, she may forget. Yet will I not forget thee. Behold, I have graven thee upon the palms of my hands, and thy walls are continually before me. Now I know that this is talking about Zion, which is a collective entity and name for God's family. But notice that Zion is made up of individuals. I'm going to show you a psalm in a minute to make my point. But just understand this, when God thinks of Zion, He thinks of you because you're part of it. So all God has to do is hold out those almighty hands, and there is your name. And He said, thy walls are continually before me. You see this all the time, where there will be memorials and there will be a wall erected. Like there's one out of Somerset, Pennsylvania, with the names of the people that perished in 9/11. Or some wall naming off the troops that perished in a particular battle. And so I think of that when I think of this. And He says, thy walls, and there's where our names are continually before me. There's never a moment when God forgets you, even if it feels like He has. Take consolation in that, and He will not forget you when you die. And when generations long have passed and people on this earth don't even know you were ever here, you will be remembered. But coming over to Psalm 87, notice that this memorial of Zion is not only in collective, but it's individual. In Psalm 87, we read in verse 5. Let me read verse 2. I always like this one. The Lord loveth the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. I don't care what choice place there is on this earth that might be a more comfortable and enjoyable place to live than where the church of God is. God loves where His church is more than that place. And don't you forget it. And of Zion it shall be said, this and that man, I mean this is specific, this, that, was born in her, and the highest Himself shall establish her. The Lord shall count when He writeth up the people that this man was born there. So when God promises to remember Zion, He promises to remember every one that's part of it individually. This, that. The Lord remembers me, singular pronoun. And not only that, but we like to think that what we have done is not forgotten. That what we have done will leave an impress. That's the thing. I want my grandchildren, when I die, to think about things that Opa did. Differences he made in their life. Impacts he had in their life. Because that's what we do when we stand over our loved ones. We think about the past. We think of our mind dredges up the memories. And for days thereafter, we play it over and over and over. And then life has a way of reaching up, out, grabbing us, drawing us in, and we move on because we have to. I have to. I remember when I was grieving the death of my father. It was not long thereafter that I got the phone call from Matt about you, Josh. And you stepped up and took front stage. And Dad went backstage. That's life. That's what happens. And so anyway, not that I forgot Dad, not that I don't still think of him, but it's not like it was at first. You get on with life. You have to. And then, but we like to think that what we've done is remembered, that we have made a contribution, we made a difference, had an impact somewhere. And you can see the importance of this expressed in the Bible writers. For example, look at Nehemiah chapter 13. I love this, and I have prayed this. Nehemiah 13 and verse 14. Remember me, O my God, concerning this. And he had done some cleanup around the house of God. And he says in Nehemiah 13:14, remember me, O God, concerning this, and wipe not out my good deeds that I have done for the house of God and for the offices thereof. Don't wipe them out. Let them be remembered. How did God answer that prayer? Did God answer that prayer? How did He do it? There you go. You got the book of Nehemiah recording it. Now, I can't expect there's going to be a book of Ben Mott. Not here. But there's one up there. There's one up there, as I'll show you. And then look at Psalm 90 and verse 17. Psalm 90 and verse 17. Psalm 90, 17. And let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us. And this is a psalm about aging. And boy, the older you get, if you're going to have any beauty at all, that's going to be it. And you know, there is beauty in old age in the faith. I remember years ago when I first started going to Antioch Primitive Baptist Church, we were singing this hymn. It's the one that I hadn't even joined the church yet, I don't think. I was visiting there. And we had a woman in that church. Her name was Lucy Jacks, and she was blind. And her daughter never married at that point. She married after her mother died. And her daughter lived with her. And you could see she would get behind her mother and she'd walk her around like this. There's an old lady, Lucy Jacks. And I used to go visit her. And she would cut me a piece of cake. She knew where everything was in the house and you didn't dare move a thing. She'd go in the kitchen. She'd pull out the drawer and get the knife and feel for the cake, cut me a piece of cake. Now I'd have cake with Sister Jacks, old sister, blind Sister Jacks. We called everybody brother and sister in the churches down there. And I remember the first time, when I went there and we were singing the hymn of Here in the Vineyard of My Lord. And I looked over and there was Sister Jacks. And she always wore her hair all wrapped up in little tight curls. And she had on a little hat. Like old people. It was so beautiful. Such a beautiful sight. Such a sweet memory. To see a saint of God, a faithful saint of God, sitting in the house of God, worshiping God, and hearing the songs of Zion. So that's the beauty we want most of all, is the beauty of our faith and our testimony. Let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish thou the work of our hands upon us. See, we want our works established. And if you go look at the word establish, you will notice in the definitions the idea of permanence. We want to do something and we want it to stick and stay. Establish thou the work of our hands, yea, the work of our hands establish thou it. And then there is this verse that assures us that God Almighty won't forget what we've done, even though others may, even those for whom we do it. In Hebrews 6:10 we are told that God is not unrighteous to forget your work and labor of love, which ye have showed toward His name, in that ye have ministered to the saints and do minister. God's got it recorded and He remembers it. And the thing that has brought me great comfort through the years, let's say Jesus tarries, and we've got a number of years yet in the history of this world. A couple of generations Ben Mott is forgotten. But I like to think of the church that Jesus Christ established and how it has endured throughout all the centuries. And it's had millions of different members throughout all the centuries. The vast, vast majority of them lying in their graves forgotten. We don't even know who they were. But yet, the church they were a part of is still here because they were faithful and they formed a link in the chain to keep it going. So I like to think that this ministry and you who are part of it are a link in that chain to keep the church of God moving on until the trumpet blasts. I will not forget. He will not forget. He will establish the work of our hands. And so when Solomon talks about things being forgotten, again, you got to plug the gospel of Christ into it. But if you leave that out of it, yeah, it's true. It's true. Most things, as far as men on this earth are concerned, get forgotten. But now, and I'm going to quote Mr. Charles Bridges, this is really good. He says, now contrast with this oblivion, everything being forgotten. Contrast this oblivion. Oh, and there was one other thing I wanted to mention. The events of history, like the defeat of the Spanish Armada, or the defeat of the British at Valley Forge, or whatever. whatever significant event there is in history, or Martin Luther nailing the thesis on the door of the church in Wittenberg. Whatever of these events that have managed to survive in the memory of history books, there are so many events, so many thoughts, relationships, events that had a bearing on that single event, and yet all of those events forgotten. Most of what went into that signal event forgotten. Now, Mr. Bridges wrote, now contrast with this oblivion of former things the great miracle of providence, the preservation of the Bible, God's own book, and therefore under his special cover. Here indeed is the remembrance of former things, free from the injury of time, free from the mists of uncertainty, because there are a lot of historical events reported. They're really not certain. They've got it exactly the way it was. But this is free from the mists of uncertainty, still full and clear as from the beginning. Now let's compare Mr. Bridges' comments with two verses. First Peter chapter 1, 1 Peter 1, 24 and 25. For all flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man as the flower of grass. All those great accomplishments wither and pass away like the flower of grass. The grass withereth and the flower falleth away, but the word of the Lord endureth forever. And then in a psalm I'll have us read later, you needn't turn now, in Psalm 11, 114, he hath made his wonderful works to be remembered. And so here was an event of history. David slew a giant with a stone. We sing about it in church. God by David's sling the giant low did lay. There is the event of the crossing of the Red Sea. We preach about it. It's recorded. We remember it. It had a feast to celebrate it that then gets reformed, and we celebrate that feast today, except we celebrate what that Passover that took place at that time represented, which is Christ, our Passover sacrifice for us. A memory that time has been unable to erase. The memory of the most signal event of all history that we know about, because God preserved it in his book that's still being preached today, and laid down an ordinance that's been observed now for over 2,000 years, preserving the memory of it. Isn't that beautiful? Plug the gospel into these despairing words, and you find that the most important things that need to be remembered are available to be remembered. Do you hear me? And that's what we will do today. It's a beautiful segue into celebration of the Lord's Supper. So going back now to Solomon, we find that there is remembrance of former things, the things that are most important to be remembered, because God has preserved his word. It is indestructible, free from the injury of time and free from the mists of uncertainty. But now we come to a section, if you'll notice in the outline, I blocked it off, that takes a piece of 2 chapters. The rest of chapter 1, beginning at verse 12, going all the way to chapter 2 and verse 11. And is there ever some neat stuff in this? Is there ever? This passage expounds the preacher's quest, and you'll see it down there in verse 13, to seek and search out my wisdom concerning all things that are done under the heaven. To seek and search out my wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. Now the word seek means to go in search or quest of. It means to seek, to find, to look for either a particular object, a person, thing, or place whose whereabouts are unknown, or an indefinite object suitable for a particular purpose. It is to try to discover or find out something unknown. So this preacher really wants to find out where the meaning of life is. What is that good for the sons of men to do? I want to get at the root of things. I want to figure things out. So he starts his quest. And then the word search means to look for or seek diligently, to try to find. It is now generally used with the word out, as it is here. He wanted to search out by wisdom. But in some poetic usages, the preposition out is excluded, which of course is a point I have an idea will very quickly be buried in oblivion. But anyway, those are the definitions. In other words, he really put himself into this. This was a diligent quest to find out all things that are done under heaven. Now, the preacher, what I want to show you now is Solomon was in a position, probably no man in history ever better positioned to really research everything out and get at the heart of things and find out what was that good for the sons of men. First of all, he says in verse 12, the preacher, this was a king preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. And I'm going to show you that Solomon's environment, when you think about it, was conducive to his research and his quest. First of all, he was king over Israel. Turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 4. And you're going to find that he was king over a nation that had a constitutional form of government. They had a king, but a king that was bound by a constitutional, it is what we call a constitutional monarchy. So he was king over a nation that had a constitutional form of government handed to them from God Almighty himself, so there could never have been a better form of government, a better place to live as far as the government was concerned than in Jerusalem. He was king over a nation that was the envy of all nations because of its form of government, as these verses will reveal. In Deuteronomy chapter 4:5, behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded you, that ye should do so in the land whither ye go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations. See, Israel gained international renown. It wasn't just some little postage stamp country that other countries knew nothing about. It was a place of international renown, and it still is to this day. Which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, who hath God so nigh unto them, as the Lord our God is in all things that we call upon him for? And what nation is there so great, that hath statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law, which I set before you this day? There was no system of government that could be more right than the one they had. And thus was the envy of the nations. He was reared up in and ruled over a nation that had superior advantages over every other nation on earth, to which I add this thought: what a place to get an education. Could you think of a better place to get an education than in Israel in the times of David and Solomon? Not only that, but he says that he conducted this pursuit by wisdom. And understand that God had given to this king who was governing this nation a superior intellect by which he could make his inquiries. Now notice, he's in a superior environment, best form of government you could have, and he's got a superior intellect. In fact, the most superior. Come over to 1 Kings chapter 3 and let's read about what God gave him in terms of an IQ. 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 11 and 12. Solomon was going to be governing this nation, and he felt like a child, and he asked God to give him understanding to know how to govern this nation. And God said unto him, because, verse 11 of 1 Kings 3, because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall there be any arise like unto thee. There's only one exception to that. Of anybody arising with wisdom greater than Solomon. There was one exception. Does anybody know who that was? Jesus Christ, who said a greater than Solomon is here. Of course, he was the God-man. So that gave him a distinct advantage when it comes to intelligence, to put it mildly. And so there you got it, right there. Superior intellect. Then look at chapter 4, 29 through 33. And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much, and largeness of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore. Can you measure the extent of the sand on the seashore? Can you? No. You couldn't have measured the extent of Solomon's IQ. That's how intelligent that man was. This is staggering to think about it. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Egypt, which history records as one of the most advanced civilizations at all. I mean, after all, the pyramids were built there. For and when you look at the city that was built under Solomon's reign, it's all gone, people. It was destroyed. It lies forgotten in ruins. But it took the breath of a queen. And it would take ours too if we could see it. I mean, he had the smarts to be able to engineer the building of a civilization like that. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, and Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahal. You say, who were they? That's the point. They were obviously brilliant enough to have been named at that time, but there's what Solomon said. No remembrance, except their name. What their intellectual achievements were, we know not. But Solomon exceeded them. And his fame was in nations round, all nations round about. Again, Israel was no forgotten postage stamp nation. I mean, I'm reading in these chronicles of history that Connie gave me, and I'm reading about countries I don't even know where they are. I don't even know what they are. They didn't figure enough in history for me to ever learn anything about them to remember them. And he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He's a tremendous composer, poet. And he spake of trees, from the cedar tree that is in Lebanon, even under the hyssop that springeth out of the wall. And he spake also of beasts, and of fowl, and of creeping things, and of fishes. I mean, imagine what kind of commentator he would have been for one of these nature shows. And he knew about these animals. He knew about these plants. He studied them. I'm going to show you that in a minute. I mean, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you pretty soon. He was not only a king, he was not only a preacher, he was not only a philosopher, he was not only a master logician, he was a scientist of the first order. He experimented with this stuff. That's how he understood it. I mean, it blows your mind to think of the research. So he could conduct his study by wisdom. That's what he said. He said he did this seeking and searching by wisdom. Now that's important to note that point, because wisdom is the capacity of judging rightly in matters relating to life and conduct, soundness of judgment in the choice of means and ends. But in order to judge rightly, people, you have to have the right information. Duh. You can't judge rightly without the right information. And you have to, in order to have the right information, you have to have truth. And how is truth arrived at? It is arrived at through right thinking, that is logic. To truly be able to judge, to do this research by wisdom, he had to judge rightly, which meant he had to have the right information, which meant he needed the truth, which is arrived at by sound, logical thinking. That's the whole purpose of logic, properly understood, is to arrive at truth. And being a wise man, Solomon knew how to take this information and sort it out and categorize it, how to connect the dots in what he learned, and he could reason things out to their logical conclusion. You see, you have some people that they will assume mountains of information. I mean, they'll read book after book, listen to tape after tape, watch YouTube after YouTube, and website after website, and glut their heads with information, but they lack something. And that is the ability to take that glut of information and categorize it and sort it out so that you can make some sense out of it, other than just some trivia to talk about. To be able to sort it out, connect the dots. It's amazing how people don't know how to connect dots to arrive at a conclusion from it. Solomon could do this. And then he had all the advantages of royalty. I mean, he was king in Jerusalem. So he could pretty well command whatever he wanted. He could command his servants to go out and find these birds and bring them here for me to research. Go get these books and bring them here for me to research. In fact, we read that God as king, we read in 1 Kings 3:13 that God also gave him what he didn't ask for. He gave him riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee in all thy days. His reign was superior to every one in his lifetime. He had all the advantages of wealth and power with which to conduct his research. There was nothing to hold him back. And then add to that in 1 Kings 4:24, God gave him peace during his regnum. In 1 Kings 4:24, he had dominion over all the region on this side the river, from Tifsa even to Azza, over all the kings on this side of the river. Watch it now. And he had peace on all sides round about, so that his research was not distracted by war. He didn't have that distraction. In fact, and then add to that. I'm trying to show you the position he was in to do his research, the advantages he had, and to that his fame was so great that we read in 1 Kings 4:31, the last part of the sentence, 1 Kings 4:31, his fame was in all nations round about. Then down in verse 34, there came of all people to hear the wisdom of Solomon from all the kings of the earth, which had heard of his wisdom. So that not only did he have all these advantages for his own private research, but he was sought out by all these kings, which mean that he had personal acquaintance with all these other cultures and their achievements. Wow! I mean, just let me tell you what I just told you, so you remember it for the next 2 days. I don't know what the memory span is. Maybe I'll do a quiz next Sunday. What do you remember from last sermon Sunday? No, I don't do that. I'm always asking my grandkids, and it puts them on the spot, and they can't think when they're put on the spot. But Ginger over there has got notes. She had filled the notebook with my Revelation 1, so she's got a way to go back and remember what I'm saying. So does Greg. He's an avid note taker. And so anyway, when you think about it, Solomon's environment was conducive to his quest. I mean, number one, he lived under the best government you could have, so it was a great place to get an education. He was endowed with superior intellect beyond anything we could even measure. He had the advantages of royalty, wealth, and power at his command. He had a peaceful reign undistracted by war and conflict, and he was sought after from all the kings of the earth, so having had acquaintance with all the other cultures and their achievements. And so coming back to Ecclesiastes, just hold on. I just have a couple of points. Got some points I want to make. It shouldn't move too slowly. But he comes back, and you come to verse 13. I gave my heart to seek and search out my wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven, this sore travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised therewith. And I've seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of the spirit. Now notice, when Solomon is researching all things that are done under the heaven, he describes it this way: this sore travail hath God given to the sons of men to be exercised therewith. Travail is bodily or mental labor or toil, especially of a painful or oppressive nature. Exertion, trouble, hardship, suffering. Know anything about that, people? But it's not only travail. I mean, a woman's labor is described as travail. That gives you a hint. Do you encounter any travail in your daily job? It's bodily or mental labor or toil, especially of a painful or oppressive nature, exertion, trouble, hardship, suffering, and then sore. It's sore travail. It's a travail that causes bodily or mental pain or distress. And I don't care what you undertake. I don't care how much you enjoy what you undertake. Stay with it long enough, and you are going to encounter pain and hardship in it at some point. That sweet little newborn baby, that little angel, stay with it. And you will find sore travail. You thought you were done when it came out crying. No, it just got started. Sore travail. Oh, that wonderful person you married. Oh, what a wonder. Give it time. There's something will leak out that's not wonderful, guaranteed. But here's the silver lining under the cloud, in the cloud people. Sore travail. Notice it says, this sore travail hath God given to the sons of men. That God has given us this sore travail shows that there's sense behind it, even if we can't come at it or figure it out, because God does nothing senseless. If God gave us this sore travail, it is there for a reason, a good reason. Because we are told of God in Deuteronomy 32:4, He is the rock, His work is perfect, and all His ways are judgment, a God of truth and without iniquity, just and right is He. All His ways are judgment. Everything God does is well calculated and well thought out. That sore travail, even though we can't make sense out of it and finally come to a conclusion of vanity, all is vanities, God has a reason for bringing us to that point. Because as children of God, He wants us to lose our love affair with this hellhole and be ready to go home. That's one thing. That's one piece of sense that's in all of this. Do you hear me? Because we are told that the same God that has subjected us to vanity has subjected us also to hope. Yeah, makes sense now. There's sense in it, in the sore travail. But not only does Solomon say it's vanity, but he says it's vexation of spirit. Vexation means that state or fact of being mentally troubled or distressed, and later used by something that causes annoyance, irritation, dissatisfaction, disappointment. In the phrase vexation of mind, vexation of spirit. So in everything you find this vexation of spirit, meaning that there is nothing in this world that brings lasting satisfaction. It always brings disappointment. I've had people, something will go wrong in their life and they will say, it seems like everything I do turns out bad. Duh? Really? Yeah. This is that sore travail. It doesn't bring satisfaction. And in this sore travail, and this is a verse, I'm going to stop on this one, I just wanted to get to it, as an example of this sore travail. As a good example of this sore travail that God has given us to be exercised with. That which is crooked cannot be made straight. And that which is wanting cannot be numbered. Think, how much in your life, of your life, do you spend trying to straighten something out? Frustrating, isn't it? You know why? Because you're never going to get it all straightened out. The fall has introduced a crookedness into this world that only God Almighty can straighten out. And that's why our blessed Lord was nailed to the tree, to straighten it out. And need I comment on the fact that there is always something wanting. Always. You never get the perfect car. You never get the perfect house. You never get the perfect spouse. What a rhyme. You never, it just doesn't. Let me tell you, I spend my life trying to straighten this church out. I have not succeeded. You know what time I barked about people coming into church late? See how many people came into church late? I can't straighten that crook out, try as I may. I can't do it. That which is crooked cannot be made straight. But we try. We try. You kind of approximate a little bit. You get it. Okay. Let go. Bing. Let up the pressure. Bing. Just an example. Do you see people of the sore travail? And need I comment, like I say, there's always something wanting. The first woman I ever baptized had a saying. She had quite a few of them. She'd repeat them often. They were good ones. She said, you can't get all your squirrels up one tree. There's always something wanting. I guarantee you find this house. You go look at it. Oh, the dream house. The perfect one for you. But houses know when they get a new resident. When you move in, it knows now you're there settled, then something goes wrong. There's that the first house we ever bought, the furnace cracked. We were having headaches. We were breathing gas fumes. I go to fill the bathtub. It won't drain. I call the people I bought it from. Did you have this problem? Of course, I had, in my stupidity, poured paint down the drain. I was dumb. I wasn't too mechanically inclined. I learned you don't do this. This will clog the tub. I've never done that. But I didn't crack the furnace. I didn't do that. Edgar, don't nod your head disbelievingly. I didn't crack that furnace. I kind of think he suspects I did. No, I did not. We were having headaches. We were breathing gas. No wonder we survived when we blow the place up. So, that which is wanting cannot be numbered. You got an idea? Got an idea? This is the sore travail that God has given to us to be exercised with. Thank you very much for your patient attention and time. How long was I, Brendan?